Imagine you have a barrel full of salt pork. How will you prepare it? In today's episode, we'll be doing a Cheshire pork pie for the sea. Thanks for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. If you haven't seen our recent salt pork episode, make sure to go back and watch that. It sets the stage for this episode. Now, this recipe is called a Cheshire pork pie for the sea. It's from The Art of Cookery. This is Hannah Glass's cookbook. It is the most popular English cookbook of the 18th century. So it's very, very common that people would recognize this and know this in our time period. Now, here's the recipe as it's written. Take some salt pork that has been boiled, cut it into thin slices, and an equal quantity of potatoes pared and sliced thin. Make a good crust. Cover the dish, lay a layer of meat, seasoned with a little pepper, a layer of potatoes, and a layer of meat, and a layer of potatoes, so on until your pie is full. Season it with pepper. When it is full, lay some butter on the top. Fill your dish about half full of soft water. Close your pie up and bake it in a gentle oven. Seems pretty simple. It is a very simple pie with just meat, potatoes, a little bit of spices, tiny bit of butter and water, seal it up, and you bake it. And you're probably thinking, okay, now why is this a pie for the sea, right? And that's part of the story about them using salt pork here. Salt pork is a way to preserve pork. It's the kind of thing that if you didn't have anything fresh, maybe you're all the way in the spring, you need food, you're going to have salt pork stored back. If you're at sea, salt pork is one of the few meats you'll have available to you all the time. Salt beef, salt pork. So that's why they're talking about it being at sea. This is the kind of food that sailors, even the officers on board ship, are going to have to use this at times. Now, we might think of this as a kind of a rich pie with lots of meat in it. It's probably actually a very inexpensive pie for the time period. So even poor people would be able to make a pie like this because it's salt pork, because it's potatoes, and basically nothing else. Here's the problem, and kind of a interesting take on this particular recipe. That sailors on board a ship, they were just given boiled salt pork. They just got this kind of boiled pork on a plate and good luck with that. If an officer on board ship, if their supplies had run out, the kind that they brought on board for themselves, livestock and whatnot, when all those things ran out, it was time to use the regular provisions that just regular sailors would have, but they wouldn't want to eat it like the other sailors would have it. So the captain on board ship would say, well, fix up that salt pork, but make sure it doesn't look like just common salt pork. So they would cook it up into a pie like this. So this might very well show up on the captain's table for him to eat, maybe with his guests. The same fare as anybody else is getting, but made in a kind of a special way. So this is a great fun recipe and a great way to use salt pork rather than just boiling it. Let's start to prepare this recipe, and we're gonna do it in the order that she kind of calls for it. We've got boiled salt pork here. And this salt pork, the boiling process is very, very simple. There are directions for boiling salt pork in Hannah Glass, so you can follow those directions. But really the trick with any salt meat like this is you put it into the water when the water's cold and you bring it up to boiling. For fresh meat, you put it in the boiling water. But this has been boiled about 45 minutes or so. The pieces aren't too big. And we're just gonna cut it into our thin slices. Now I do wanna check to see whether or not it's too salty. And boy, it's gonna be good. It's not too salty. So you may not have a giant full barrel of salt pork, but you still want to experience this recipe. And that situation happened in the 18th century, and so they had a sort of a speed method for salt preparation. If you want to have salt pork, use it for a recipe like this, but you don't have salt pork, all you have to do is take your pork pieces and put them in salt, dry salt, for maybe 24 hours or so ahead of time, and then wipe that salt off and you can use it. It's going to give you almost exactly the same sort of flavor. It's going to be not quite as tough as salt pork would be because the salt pulls all the moisture out. Even when it's like submerged, it still pulls all the moisture out, makes the meat a little firmer, but it definitely gives it a little bit different flavor also. So there were situations in the 18th century where they had recipes. It's like, oh, you want to make a quick salt pork? Well, this is how you do it. The meat has been pre-cooked, but the potatoes are not. I've already peeled these up with my knife. I am gonna make sure these are thin slices so that they cook all the way through in the pie. She calls for a good pie crust. So we're making up just the standard short paste with flour, butter, tiny bit of salt, the flour and the butter in a 3-to-1 ratio. Very, very simple and easy to do pie crust. Something you should definitely do at home. Don't buy your pie crusts. You need to make them. Our pie is all assembled. It's ready to go into the oven, and she calls for it to be baked in a gentle oven. So this is likely about 350 degrees. Now we're going to be using our giant clay oven for this, and that's a little bit trickier. So I'm going to aim for about 400 degrees, put it in there, probably bake it, I don't know, I'm guessing 45 minutes, and the temperature will slowly go down. If you're doing it in a regular home oven, yeah, 350 degrees should sound good, and well, we'll just see how long it takes. So let's get it in the oven. Wow, this pie smells great. And it came out of the oven, it looks good. And I cut into this and the steam came out and everything, and just, I can't wait. I cannot wait to try this out. It looks so good. Let's try a piece of the pork all by itself. Turned out perfect. I was worried it was going to be too salty because it's salt pork. There's a real reason why we have all these potatoes in here. That dilutes the saltiness out of this so that it's not, kind of too salty. And really, it turned out just right. And all that pepper in there, again, balances it. Now, the original recipe may have had all that pepper in there to sort of offset maybe bad salt pork that had been in the barrel too long. But in this case, It's really good. Love that peppery flavor in there. We didn't need to add any salt, and it doesn't need any other spices. I mean, you could go crazy and add nutmeg to this, but you don't need to. It's really good just like this, and so incredibly simple. I mean, it's just got the salt pork, it's got the potatoes, a little bit of butter, and the pie crust, and it's a great combination. So I'm really liking how this one turned out. It's going to be one of my favorites, definitely, for this year. It's great to think about a recipe like this. It seems in the cookbook that it's so simple. There's really nothing to it. But when you understand the connections, the connection between the idea of using the salt pork and it being a Cheshire pork pie for the sea, and the reasons why you would do this, now it starts to make all kinds of sense. In context, it's a very important recipe, so I really like this one and suggest it to a lot of different people. And of course, it's in Hannah Glass's cookbook, so if you're interested in that, you can check out our website. We sell that cookbook, and it is one of the best for understanding what's going on with English cookery of the 18th century. It's been almost exactly 10 years ago that we did a Cheshire pork pie. You definitely want to take a look at this episode.